What's going on, everyone? My name is Silver, and today I'm going to talk to you about the simulation room. Now, the simulation room is technically quite easy to do, but it is a little bit hard to understand, mainly because the way that they teach you isn't necessarily the greatest way. But hopefully with this video, you guys can get a better grasp upon the simulation room, and at least how to, at least in the later difficulties. It's not so bad in the early difficulties, but hopefully in the later difficulties, you guys aren't going to have too much of a problem. So, let's go ahead and get into it then. Alright, so the first thing I want to mention is, before I even get into any of this, when it comes to the difficulty, it really does. I highly recommend that you start with the highest one that you can possibly do. So like for me, difficulty 4 and sector B is really the highest I can do. I'm a little bit above the recommended power, but sometimes, or most of the time, you're gonna be under the recommended power, which is perfectly fine. You can either be above or a little bit below. It's gonna happen sometimes. But normally, you want to start with the highest level of difficulty and the highest sector that you can possibly do. And this is mainly just for time reasons. So, because if I start with here and I clear it, I'll get all of these rewards that you see right here. And all of these rewards are from these previous difficulties that you see here. So I'll get the stuff from 1, 2, and 3. And then also from 4 Sector A, if I do start at B and finish the Sector B. Then I will get everything from the previous ones as well. So it's just a little time-saving thing. So I highly recommend that when these things are refreshed, or the daily reset, I mean, technically, that you do the highest level and the highest sector that you can complete. If you can't do the highest level or highest difficulty or sector, then you can start with the one that is right below it. So if I can't do B, I can at least do A. So then I'll still get all the rewards from the previous ones, and then I can go from A and then into B and then into C. And the same thing if I start with B. I can do B and then go into C. So that's just really more of a little tidbit that I wanted to get out, because this will save you a lot of time. Instead of going from 1, 2, 3, and then 4, you can just start with 4, and then, well, for me, 4. You can just start with the highest one, and then you'll get everything that you need from all the previous sectors and difficulties. Now, of course, this is going to be mainly my opinion. Some of the people might have their own opinions, but for me, when it comes to at least starting the first, or even the later sectors, I always like to choose the normal ones, even though they do have like a lesser chance of, I think, getting better buffs. This is at least a way you can avoid your units taking a lot of damage, or even just one of them dying. Because in the hard ones, some of them can be pretty difficult. So, at least in my opinion, I like to start with mainly the normal ones, just because I can always upgrade them later if given the chance. Alright, so when it comes to choosing buffs, you want to choose the buffs that will benefit more of your team. Preferably your whole team. But if you can't get your whole team, then at least preferably 2 or more. Just so that this way, when it comes to benefiting your group, at least you have 2 units that are under the effect of a certain buff. And that way you're at least able to do some more damage and clear sectors a lot easier and also a lot faster. So when it comes to choosing buffs, you want to make sure that it benefits your whole team, and if you can't, at least try and get 2 of them to be benefited by a certain buff. In which, if you want to know how a buff will affect others, basically right here, effective 4, this one is missileless. This one is basically for almost everything except for sniper rifles, shotguns, submachine guns, etc. So this one will affect a lot of my units here. And then this one is for defenders, which I only have 1 defender. This would be utterly useless. So ultimately, you want to choose the buffs that will benefit your whole group, and how you can actually determine that is just by looking in the right hand corner of each buff, and it will actually tell you who it affects. Now, another thing to note is that if the buff doesn't have an effective 4, then it will automatically affect your whole team. So if one of your buffs does not have anything like this, then ultimately that's going to be the best choice. But then again, you also do want to read the actual buff and see what it does. Because there are some buffs that are better than others, and some that are very, very weak. Like this one right here, Restart Support. Even though it is pretty neat. However, the only reason why it is terrible, at least in my opinion, is because it's only activated when you're below 20% health. You do not want any of your Nikkes below 20% health, because they are 1 shot or 2 shots away from death. And if you're familiar with the simulation room, you'll know why. But if you're not, basically, if one of your Nikkes die, they're dead until you can revive them. So you want to avoid your Nikkes falling below basically to death. All right. So another thing I actually want to talk about is what's called the buff chain. Now, the buff chain is very important. This actually basically determines upon how powerful your buffs are. Because as you can see here, my buff chain is at level 1, so all of my buffs are at level 1. And upon how I can get them above to like level 2, level 3, and so forth, is actually by, again, the buff chain. The higher level your buff chain is, the higher your buffs will be, all the way up to a maximum of 5. So now upon how you increase your buff chain is simply by getting getting buffs of the same shape. So as in, if I want to try and upgrade my buff chain, getting 3 of the same shapes, like square, getting 3 squares will increase my buff by 1, which will increase it to 2, and then another 3 will increase it to 3, and then another 3 to 4, up to a total of 8 buffs. If you have 8 buffs and they are all the same shapes, it will be at level 5, and all of your buffs will be at its maximum power. Ideally, you want to try and get your buff chain as high as you possibly can. However, if you're like me at the moment, and where you're almost done with the simulation, and you only have like level 1 buffs, don't worry, there is a way for you to do that. For you to change the shapes of your buffs. And that kind of goes on to this one, which is basically there's 2 ways. There is 2 ways to change the shape of your buffs so that you can have them all into one shape. Now, you have these things called unknown rewards, which is basically commanding ability tests. These are, how to put it, these are wild cards. So they can benefit you, they can absolutely destroy you. It is basically a gambling thing. So if I click this one, I can convert one active buff into a certain thing. So I'm going to do option 3, and I'm going to choose this one, and see, it went from a square to a diamond. Now granted, I'm still at level 1 because I had 3 different shapes, but ultimately those unknown rewards type of stuff, even though they are wild cards, you do have the ability, you might get lucky and be able to do what I just did, which is transform a buff into a different shape. And which sometimes, not all the time, this is very rare, but I have seen it happen, is that it will actually give you the option to convert all of your buffs into one specific shape. However, that always comes to also a difficult side, where you're going to also be sacrificing something. So when it comes to clicking on those, always be prepared. You might get something really good, you might get something very bad. It's basically a wild card, so it's not always 100% that you're always going to get something like that. Sometimes you might end up losing 3 Nikkes. And if the game really hates you, the game chooses the 3 Nikkes that are part of your core team. Yeah. Alright, so now another way to actually increase your buff chain, I surprisingly have level 2 buffs now, is by what's called Spec Up. Now, this will only really appear when you're about to face the final boss of the sector. This is kind of your upgrade type of thing. So if you click on this, it will not 100%, but sometimes it will give you the ability to convert all of your buffs into one specific shape. However, this isn't a wild card. This one will always affect you. This will always help you. It's never going to destroy you. It's never going to do any of that. It's always going to upgrade your abilities or allow you to change a certain shape, well, a certain buff into a certain shape. So that way, then you might be able to increase your buff chain. So this one is always going to benefit you. So if I click this, surprisingly, I can change everything to a square type. So if I do that, I went from I'm still at level 2, because I'm missing 1 buff. I only have 4 buffs. Wow. But basically, as you can just see, all of my buffs are now square, even though I had 3 diamonds and I think a circle. Now, of course, again, it's not always going to be that. Sometimes it might allow you to enhance an ability from like a certain rarity to a different rarity. But again, that one is always going to benefit you. And with that, that's basically everything for the simulation room. Kind of to rephrase, when it comes to selecting buffs, you want to select buffs that will benefit your whole group. If you can't benefit your whole group, at least 2 or more of your units. And then the next thing is to increase your buff chain. And part of how you do that is getting the same shapes for every single buff. So the more of the same shapes you have, the higher level your buff chain will be, and thus the higher level of your buffs, up to a total of level 5. And that's basically it for the simulation room. There's not really a whole lot to really optimize here. As long as you get buffs that benefit your group and you increase the buff chain, you're going to be able to take on a lot of the stuff that happens in every sector. Yes, technically the rarity of buffs also helps. Getting like epic buffs, SSR buffs helps. But sometimes you're going to do certain sectors and you're not going to have that ability. Because, again, this is also pure RNG, so sometimes you might just get rarity buffs. Sometimes you actually might get an epic buff. Like I did, and I have 2 right now. So, but hopefully this has helped you guys. And if you guys do have any questions, then please let me know in the comment section below. And I will see you guys hopefully in the next one. And hopefully the next one will be better than this. If this guide isn't the greatest. I am still kind of new to this, so just bear with me. So, I'll see you guys later. Take care.